The FARA R1 from SilverStone does look really nice, but what issues lie beneath? Let's find out. What's up everyone, Eric here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. Now before I get into the overview, I just want to have full disclosure here. SilverStone did send me over this case so that I could review it, but as always, all the opinions expressed in this video are mine. And as always, there will be timestamps down in the description, so you can jump to whatever interests you, but I do recommend you watch the whole review. Okay, with all that out of the way, there are three versions of the R1. The R1 with an MSRP of $70 US, the R1 Pro with an MSRP of $110 US, and the R1 Rainbow, but outside of SilverStone's website, I can't seem to find this case, so it doesn't seem to exist outside of their website. So the R1 comes with one 120mm rear exhaust fan pre-installed, while the R1 Pro comes with four 5V ARGB fans. Both the R1 and the R1 Pro come in either black or white. The model I was sent was the FARA R1 Pro, so I will be taking a look at the ARGB fans. But other than that, the cases are pretty much the same. So the dimensions of the R1 are 44.6 centimeters high by 20.7 centimeters wide by 39 centimeters deep. SilverStone does provide a small bag that has all the screws and fittings in it. There are also some zip ties in there. The R1 Pro does come with that ARGB hub and a fan splitter. There is no manual included in the box, which I'm perfectly fine with. But if it is something that you need or want, it is easy enough to download from SilverStone's website. Taking a look at the case, the R1 does have a fine metal mesh front panel. This panel can be removed by pulling the bottom of the panel away from the chassis. Now the front I/O is attached to the front panel, so you do need to be careful not to pull the panel off too far, because doing so may damage the cables. Taking a closer look at the panel, there is a dust filter on the panel, but there is no way to remove the filter, so cleaning the front panel will be a bit annoying. Looking back at the chassis, we can see three of the pre-installed ARGB fans. Putting the front panel back on and looking at the front I/O, there is a combo port for the front audio out and microphone. There are two USB 3.0 Type A ports and one USB 2.0 Type A port, as well as the restart and power button. Along the top of the case, there is a large magnetic dust filter. It is pretty well color matched to the case. Now moving to the rear of the case, we see the location of the rear I/O and one 120mm pre-installed ARGB fan. There are 7 horizontal expansion slots, 2 of which are reusable and the rest are break-off covers. And finally at the bottom, we see the power supply location. Taking a look at the bottom of the case, there are 4 plastic feet. These feet give 15mm of ventilation for the power supply. All of these feet are made with hard plastic, so the case actually slides around quite easily. There is a removable dust filter for the power supply, but the only way to access it is by tilting the case or by putting the case onto its side. Moving on to the right side of the case, there is a steel side panel. To remove the right side panel, you need to undo the 2 thumb screws at the rear of the case, then slide the panel back and lift it away. This side panel is a bent sheet of steel with some okay sized grooves in it, so it does feel fairly rigid. Moving to the left side of the case, the left side panel is tempered glass. To remove the glass panel, you should lay the case onto its right side and undo the 4 thumb screws that hold the glass in place, then lift the glass panel up and away. Now this glass panel is 3mm tempered glass and has little to no tint. So that is it for the exterior of the case. But before I take a look at the inside of the case, if you like what I'm doing here, can you please hit that subscribe button? It helps out the channel a lot. And speaking of helping out the channel, I also have an Amazon Associates link, so if you click on one of the links in the description and then add an item or items to your cart and order them, the channel will get a small kickback. Taking a look at the inside of the case, there is a basement. There are 2 removable SSD trays on top of the shroud. Removing the SSD trays does expose honeycomb ventilation holes. The shroud also has 3 cutouts along the top of the shroud. Taking a look at the motherboard tray, there are 3 cutouts along the top of the motherboard tray, but most of your cables will be running through the large vertical cutouts at the front of the case. The R1 does support mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards. The maximum GPU length with the front fan installed is 120mm. but that will be cut down if you go with a front mounted radiator. The R1 has a max CPU cooler height of 165 millimeters. Time to turn the case around and look at the backside of the motherboard tray. There is up to 20 millimeters behind the motherboard tray for running cables. There are also a large number of cable tie-offs to help with cable management. There is an additional 2.5-inch sled on the backside of the motherboard tray. So that is 3 sleds in total. Moving on to the basement, we see a drive cage. This drive cage can hold 2 2.5-inch drives or 1 3.5-inch and 1 2.5-inch drive. With the cage installed, there is 205 millimeters given for the power supply and cables. The drive cage can be easily removed by removing one thumb screw, then slide the cage towards you and lift it away. And with the drive cage removed, there'll be just about 325 millimeters for the power supply and cables. Okay, that brings us to the cooling options. The R1 Pro has 4 120mm fans pre-installed, 3 at the front and 1 at the rear. These fans have a 3-pin fan connector and are 5-volt ARGB. Now the R1 comes with 1 rear exhaust fan, but it is not 5-volt ARGB. Now this chassis can support up to 6 120mm fans. So that's 3 fans at the front, 2 fans along the top, and 1 fan at the rear. Now if you do prefer to have 140mm fans, you can have up to 4, so that's 2 at the front and 2 along the top. For radiator support, you can have up to a 280mm at the front, or up to a 240 along the top, and or a 120 at the rear. Your maximum RAM height will be 35mm if you go with a 240 along the top, so that is just a small asterisk there. Okay, that is it for the overview. If you have found this video helpful, you might also want to check out some of my other case reviews. I'll link a card to the playlist above. I'll also have it linked in the description. Moving on to my build notes, starting off with cable management. I was able to fit the non-modular power supply as well as all the cable extensions while keeping things fairly clean looking. Now I did have some issues getting the right panel back onto the case when I was done, but I was able to get it on. Now with that being said, I do highly recommend going with a modular power supply for this case, especially if you don't have to deal with a whole wad of Molex cables. Dealing with those ARGB cables will be a whole lot easier. Now keeping on the concept of cable management, the cable cutouts on the top of the shroud are not deep enough because once the power supply is installed, you can't actually get anything into the back cutout, which also makes that back SSD spot on the top of the shroud not really usable because you can't really get cables to it all that easily. You can just move that sled to the back side of the motherboard tray so that you can still have the 5 storage options, just not 2 on the top of the shroud, which is a little weird if that's the way they have it stocked, but yet if you go with a standard ATX power supply, it's not usable. The next thing I wanted to go over was the ARGB fans and the ARGB hub. These fans are 3-pin 5-volt LEDs, so they are not compatible with the 4-pin 12-volt LEDs. Like, just don't plug them into the 12-volt or you will fry them. The RPM of this fan is around 1350. These fans can be daisy chained together and then plugged directly into your motherboard or into the ARGB hub. The hub does have 4 3-pin 5-volt connectors, so you can add extra LEDs to this. The hub itself is magnetic, so you can actually stick it to the backside of the motherboard tray or to the top of the cage like I've done. Now this hub does have a button on it that then cycles through several options. It also gives you the option of plugging in the restart button from your front I/O so that you can control the LEDs that way. But doing this will mean that you don't have a reset button on your front I/O. The hub does have a connector that then can be plugged into your motherboard's 5-volt ARGB header, which will allow you to use your board manufacturer's software to control the LEDs. You'll need to hold down the button on the hub for 5 seconds to switch it over. It does like a little double blink thing. By pressing the button, you can switch control back to the hub. And by holding the button for 8 seconds, you can turn off the LEDs. The colors look very good, and the LEDs do provide a very even spread of light over the fan, so it looks pretty good, at least it does to me. Okay, now for the temperature testing. But if you do have any questions on how I test the cases, please check out my case testing methodology video. I'll have a card above and I'll also have it linked in the description. And that should answer your questions on how I test the cases. Now, I didn't really test too many different configurations here because the stock configuration has 4 fans. Looking at the CPU workload test first, the R1 Pro stock configuration had an average CPU temperature of 68.7 C. And then when I removed the front panel and dust filter, the average CPU dropped to 65.7C, so a 3 Celsius drop, which is kind of starting to get to be a fair bit there. So I did remove the front 3 fans and had a simulated R1, and that had an average CPU temperature of 72.8C. For the game testing, the stock configuration running at full speed had the average GPU temperature at 69.8C and had the CPU's average temperature at 44.1C. And again, when I removed the front panel and dust filter, the average GPU temperature dropped to 67.1, with the average CPU temperature dropping to 39.9. So that actually had a 5 Celsius drop for the CPU, so that's quite a bit there. Now again, for the simulated R1, it had the average GPU temperature up at 80.7C, with the average CPU temperature being 50.3C. So that was starting to get pretty high up there. So depending on what your average room temperature is, that could get to the point of maybe thermally throttling. Okay, now comparing the R1 Pro's stock configuration to all the other cases I've tested, starting with the sound level testing. Now it is at the bottom of the list, but that's also because it's the only case I've tested that comes stock with 4 fans. Moving on to the CPU workload testing, the R1 Pro is in the middle of the chart here, while the simulated R1 is at the bottom of the chart. So only having the 1 fan and trying to get through those filters does hurt the temperatures. In the game testing, the R1 Pro is again in the middle of the chart, while the simulated R1 is second from the bottom. Moving along to the noise equalized testing. So all the cases have been equalized to 35 dBA unless they don't actually hit 35 dBA and then they're just running at max speed. In the CPU workload test, the R1 Pro is on the lower part of the chart, with an average CPU temperature of 70.6C. For the noise equalized game testing, the R1 Pro lands in the middle of the list again, with an average GPU temperature of 72.7C and an average CPU temperature of 46.3C. Moving on to the fan normalized testing, the sound level of the R1 with the 4 Arctic P12 fans was 39.5 dBA, which lands it in the middle of this chart. In the CPU workload test, the R1 is at the bottom of the chart with an average CPU temperature of 67C. Now that's not to say 67C is bad, it's just not as good as some of the other cases, and that's likely because of the front filter. Now the game testing had the R1 near the bottom of the chart with an average GPU temperature of 73C and an average CPU temperature of 41.6C. So what do I think of the SilverStone FARA R1? It's a really nice looking case. It comes in different color options and different fan configurations. So if you want RGB, there's an option for that. If you don't want RGB, there's an option for that. In the 35 dBA noise normalized testing, the R1 Pro did okay. The temperatures likely could have been better if the front filter could have been removed, but the front filter is attached to the front panel, so that's not really an option. Now the simulated R1 testing wasn't too bad. You should be adding additional fans, but the temperatures weren't thermally throttling in my situation, but they were getting up there. Now the mix of the RGB fans and this white case is, well, pretty. Like, I really like the look of this case with these fans. But with that being said, I do have some minor issues with this case. The first issue I have is the glass panel and the way it's attached to the chassis. Having the 4 screws, 1 in each corner, is kind of out of date nowadays. I would have much preferred having the glass slide on like it does with the H1M. But my primary concern or issue is cleaning. This case is going to be a bit of a pain to clean properly. And that's because the front I/O is attached to the front panel, so you can't just quickly remove the front panel and go spray it out. You'll either need to take the whole case to wherever you want to spray everything out and spray it out there, or you'll need to actually unwire all the cables that are connected to the front panel and then take it out and spray it, which is crazy. So I don't think you're going to have to pick up the whole case and bring it to where you want to clean it out, because cleaning it out around where you have your computer normally is not a good idea either. Now, if these issues aren't a deal breaker for you, this is a nice case, and what really matters is what you can actually buy it for. Now, the MSRP of these cases are okay. I would hope you can get it for a little less than MSRP, but the MSRP price or prices aren't that bad. Now, if you can actually find these cases at MSRP will depend on the country you live in and where you're looking. Because at the time of filming, stock for nearly everything, not just computer stuff, but for everything, is really messed up. And the R1 and the R1 Pro are hard to find, just period, let alone for MSRP. And don't pay some third-party reseller twice MSRP. Just please don't do it. The only site I could find that had them well priced was Amazon.ca, and those were actually only for the white versions. The black version was more money for reasons I don't fully understand. So if you can find these cases for MSRP or thereabouts anyways, it's not a bad price for what you get. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching, maybe hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Please follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below. It is completely free to join, and it's a great place to get a hold of me if you have any tech-related questions. You might want to check out these videos here. They should be along the lines of pretty much of what you just watched. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.